people will join as they join. So uh, thank you all for joining us for another one of these events. This is sort of the third in our series, and the third one that we have planned. We're looking at other topics for the future, but this is a sort of a joint project between Section X, Section Y, and the AAAS membership office. So thrilled to have you here, and we're just trying to sort of bring some of the skill sets of our two sections where a lot of the science policy folks are and a lot of the science communications folks are, to sort of a broader audience within the AAAS. And so with that, I'm going to share my screen and I will turn the floor over to Adriana, if I can. There's that, because I'm going to drive the slides while she talks.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll be talking about members talking to members. As Mike said, this is our sort of actionable session. Up to now, we've talked about ways to engage and communicate and looking to address what's going on currently in the state of science. I did add another title here to make sure everyone's on the same page that we're going to talk about what is the value of research in advancing public mission. We'll talk about that as we move forward. So my presentation is just a bit of a framework of the current state of funding, or explaining a bit of research funding that you'll be talking about in your breakout rooms, with advocacy as well. So let's go to the next slide. So the idea is a lot of you, we often get trainees and early career scientists at these sessions who are interested in how do I advocate for my research and for funding that is currently being cut. So a bit of background here, and this is from the NSF Higher Education Research and Development Survey from 2022. U.S. R&D spending in universities was around 98 billion, 97.8, which includes, for example, Pitt, 1.28 billion. Most of this comes from the federal government. So you have the green, federal, also state and local government, 814 million and then 10.8 respectively. So keep in mind all these chunks here. Second category, which is in all orange, institutionally financed research. The rest, as you can see on the left side, is externally driven, so not coming from the institution. Not to get too much into the weeds here, but just so you're aware. So when you see uncovered cost share, it's F&A costs and direct costs that are not covered by universities, that relate to operations, that benefit multiple projects and so on, and other things. The other side, the cost share that you see under that is also externally driven. It can come from solicitations. Again, the university can contribute resources to a sponsored project beyond the amount that's funded by that agency. Contribution can be made in a number of ways, but again, this cost share contributes as well. This portion is about 218 million for UPIT, total of 24.5 billion for FY22, which you see in the bottom, top left. And the third, which is all blue, you have all other things, business, nonprofits, and other sources. And so the point of this is to show, think a little bit about how institutions are being funded, where this comes from, and what's happening internally and externally. And again, as you think about your advocacy, you may consider some of these amounts and different sections here. So next slide. So also wanted to show you a slide on agencies. This is looking, for example, at the FY23 presidential budget request. The majority was, for example, actually, no, sorry, the budget was 205.9 billion, increasing of 28%. And you can see all the various agencies here. One thing to point out here is that this is not actually what you might think about the science budget, but it's really different amounts that are determined independently for each agency, different bundles of research funding that contribute to that pie. And they're also funded differently to where I did have some notes on this, but I don't want to go too much into the weeds here. So for example, as an example, DoD funding, the budget is developed by the DoD, submitted to OMB for review, incorporated into the president's budget proposal, which is submitted to Congress. It is then OMB then assesses the request in the context of overall federal spending priorities and available resources. And then once Congress approves the budget and it's signed by the president, OMB will apportion funds to DoD for execution. So there are multiple different mechanisms here. If anyone's really interested in the weeds of budgets, we can chat later. But just to be aware that different agencies get their budgets from different mechanisms, largely involving OMB and Congress. And so again, thinking through advocacy, where do I do this? Which agency am I going to look at? How big is the pie and that sort of thing. So moving on. And generally, again, Congress holds the power of the purse. So it's important to know the difference between authorizations and appropriations, which you may have heard of. So authorization is essentially how much money can be spent. Appropriations is actually the money funding amount that is available and given. And authorizations usually are ways to apply pressure to Congress to increase the numbers. You can see here potential doubling pathways for the different agencies, what this would look like if everything was appropriated. And of course, as you might expect, appropriations have been lower over time compared to authorizations as well. And you can see the numbers on the right side. Again, the point just being that, again, when you're advocating for increased funding, pay attention to where it says authorized or appropriated and how you're gonna go about doing that. Next slide. And so having that bit of background, again, the goal for today and kind of moving forward is going to be to think about how your research, which is publicly funded, advances a specific purpose, right? A broader purpose. When you're talking to, as a constituent, you're a member of Congress, and also when you're thinking through bringing expertise to members of Congress on specific topics, the idea is they might use that information in particular ways based on their priorities, the current state of things, and how they make decisions on those issues, depending on what's important to their constituents, for example, what their priorities are at the moment. Again, knowing sort of the background of the member, right? Whether their policy priorities, what have they voted on, which committees are they on, what kinds of things might they be working on at the moment by sort of what's going on in the country, but also understanding the federal budget process and how funding is allocated that we've talked about it a little bit. In terms of messaging, so we'll spend the rest of the time talking about this, but you want it to be really concise, clear and compelling, again, resonating based on what they're interested in, what their constituents are asking them to do. There are multiple ways to do this. Today, we're going to just do sort of brief pitches, but you might consider other methods of communication, like a letter, editorial, and other things that are, writing is also effective. And you want to highlight benefits, again, potentially to their constituents, addressing concerns that might come up in the conversation and follow up. This is also something to keep in mind, although we'll be doing a brief pitch today. You want to continue being a resource for them and providing feedback when they come to you as a resource. The next slide. And so 3 questions to keep in mind, and we can share a link to the slides too as you're going in the breakout rooms. Really focus on your particular audience, your message, and what medium you're going to use, again, oral or writing. Really understanding your audience and their motivations will be important. Next slide. And here, just to reiterate again, we're going to talk a little bit about how to pitch your research. And one thing to remember is that it's basically flipping the argument from the academic way of thinking, where you're starting with background details and then results conclusion. You want to give them the bottom line first. What is the thing you want them to know? Why do they care? And then everything else backs up your point with background and data and more information on that. So try it as again, we're going to do most of today in breakouts. Keep in mind that you want to kind of hook them initially and then build from there. Next slide. The different ways to engage. This is always questions about this. What is advocacy and lobbying, and what sorts of things can you do? So the goal again is going to be to raise awareness of your research, inform decision makers, especially if they're looking for particular expertise, explain how this is going to advance a broader mission. And you can do this through advocacy, which is promoting or trying to promote a specific cause or issue, versus policy education, which is informing the public and policymakers about a particular issue. So you're not necessarily trying to convince them to do one thing or the other. And then you have lobbying, where you're trying to influence a particular piece of legislation, fund a specific program, vote on a specific bill, and so on. So again, we can talk more about this. Don't want to go into the weeds of this, but just so you're aware, there's different ways to approach these issues. Next slide. And then this is again different ways you can engage, again, longer term things. You can do things that are quick if you have a few minutes, phone, social media, and so on. You can write letters, you can invite your member to your lab. Of course, come to DC, and then also if you're really motivated, you can start your own policy group, do more of this locally and engage either locally or federally in advocacy. And next slide. Again, a lot of folks here have been interested in local level engagement. Again, what we're going to do today, you can do it at either level. Again, just for your awareness and education, federal level obviously influences federal legislation, regulations, and policies, targeting members of Congress, agencies, and other decision makers. It can be, for example, funding for specific programs. Again, trying to influence legislation. You want to build relationships with elected officials, research your issue and their background and their interests, and you can participate in various debates. Locally, it will be more specific to community or city-specific issues, for example. You can see a few examples here. That can mean city council, mayor, community organizations, or neighborhood groups. And again, a lot of times these are things that influence local issues like transportation, schools, and so on. And again, you can participate in meetings locally as well. So keep that in mind. And again, you can pitch either one as you're thinking about this today. And then, so for the elevator pitch itself, on the next slide, you want to start with something that it's sort of broadly applicable, getting their attention, establishing what the need is, and then seeing how you can fulfill that, how this is going to impact what they're doing. And I'll show you an example, and then have a call to action at the end of that. So let me go quickly to the next slide. And you may come back to this as you're thinking about this in breakouts. So the idea is going to be, I want you to do something specific. I'll give you a reason why you should care about what you find important. Briefly, I'll tell you how my work supports this, and then conclude by telling you what happens if you do this. So next slide has an example for you. So for example, you can use this as your pitching. Hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm a researcher at a given institution focused on a specific field. We are working on whatever research area. This is critical because what impact is it going to have in the world? And then you can see sort of the 4 last sentences here. explaining how the research supports this. So talk a little bit about what your research has done. Why they should support it. We believe that this increased funding for research is going to allow something to happen. We won't tell you what, because that's part of the fun. And then the ask is going to be support this research that is going to help us, again, achieve something, right? Will benefit your audience. You can say it can benefit your constituents in a certain way, and ultimately strengthen our scientific enterprise. So again, keep that in mind, that big picture, the ways that they're going to look at this is what kinds of things are motivating at the national level, for example, and how that aligns with their values. Okay, I think that's all I had. So I'm gonna walk you through the breakouts. Also, Mike, can you, I don't know if somebody can share the link to the slides in the chat. Did you have it there? Okay, thank you. So the goal is going to be, again, focus on explaining the value of your research and the federal program that funds your work to the 3 different audiences. You're going to stay in your room for about the next 30 minutes, and then we'll come back and recap. You're going to talk to congressional members and staff number 1, 1, and 2. We're still going to split you up randomly based on that. 3 and 4 is going to be general public, and then 5 and 6 is non-technical professionals. So the idea is Congress, you will talk about sort of broad public benefit of the work. How this, again, think about how this resonates with congressional members and staff. Public will be sort of museum, science communication, talking to the public about your work. Think about how to frame that in that sort of very broad perspective. These are going to be people that understand how to implement research and how it's being used. And then the last one, non-technical professionals can be, for example, talking with folks in the humanities or social sciences, folks who can also include scientists from other fields. And with the idea that the science your research will have impacts in the community as well. And your facilitators can explain if you have additional questions. But I think we're now done with the slides. Yeah,
Debbie had her hand up before we jump in. Is it
sure.
very quick, Debbie?
Go ahead.
Yeah, it is bearing on this because there's nothing wrong with this. But I also think it's just kind of like the usual things that we have done before. And I think, the times are different than they were in the past. And so what I'm wondering is if you are willing or not, or you think, okay, this is like inappropriate, whatever, which I totally understand because I realize I'm more on the activist edge, is to talk about other mechanisms that people are using today, which are beyond these. And those include things like, for example, the CDC workers going to a member of Congress listening session and protesting the loss of jobs. People going, and to, another session and saying, okay, well, we're concerned, about the impacts of this thing. And again, going to the actual listening sessions, going to members' offices, doing things like protesting, like, beyond March of Science, but actually going to local members of Congress office, which is, I think, very effective. And things like legal action, which I think at this point is our best option for things like the sad stories I've been hearing all weekend long of, say, people with NSF career grants who are like in year 3 of year 5 and they've lost their funding. So I'm wondering if you're willing to expand the actions to things beyond this more traditional.
Oh yeah, we're like this is we're not intent to this wasn't to sort of say, and here's the only menu of things to do. The whole point was to try to actually practice on what people say whenever they are in one of those contexts. Given that, you know, people like me and other folks, including UW, have been on the receiving end of remarkably poor explanations for the
Uh-huh.
justification of. So yeah, we're not saying only write letters or only do that. Like you have to actually do a whole bunch of things. We are trying to focus on the communication skills given whatever it is that you decide to do.
Yeah, I think, yeah, because part of it is just, at least in my mind, is trying to really get across some of these implications. So it's not just, and for me, part of the concerns that I have about the S&T policy leadership in DC is the focus primarily on more money for research, like, and talking about things like the budget and not talking about the actual like impacts, um, that are things like, in the communities. So like here in Pittsburgh, where both Mike and I are located, it's a big deal when Carnegie Mellon and Pitt and the other universities lose their funding, not just on the universities, but on the whole economy, like of the region. Um, so yeah,
Yeah, so
go ahead, Mike.
this is what we're going to try to do in the breakout section is like have reactions to these types of arguments
Mhm.
and sort of, have people give a sense of like, well, do they think that's effective? How are ways to improve it? So let's go to the breakout sessions.
Okay.
Okay, great. I'm going to open the breakout rooms if that's okay for everyone.
All right, thanks for coming back. Hopefully had some good conversations, recognizing this is a rapid fire, quick moving around, hopefully give you a bit of a taste of how to do some of this. And we wanted to just go around and see if anyone had takeaways, things they heard that were useful that the whole group could benefit from. Maybe we could go in the room order, just a couple minutes each. I don't know, Dahlia, do you want to start us off?
Well, as it turns out, I had a number of policy savvy folks in at least a couple of the rooms. But we did have we didn't do the pitches so much did one pitch actually that was very interesting and had some good discussion around that. But so the discussions did veer into communication and engagement and sort of some of the broader questions here, frankly.
Yeah, sort of similar for mine. I think a lot of what has come up is how do we make this sort of like a real impactful, tangible thing that a member can relate to or their staff, different ways to do that and talking through the constituent concerns. And then also just more broadly, how this relates kind of to our duty as a nation to think more about science and how it's impacting folks. Also with the NSF anniversary coming up, so also like broader sort of things around the institution. Third, and this is the sort of congressional folks. So Patty, do you want to talk about your rooms takeaways?
Sure, sure. And mine was focused on communicating with the public. It's having a public audience. And so just kind of synthesizing, one of the themes that came up in the various discussions were the idea that scientists, as we know, we are kind of in a bubble. And so we do find ourselves often talking with people that think like us, are predisposed to being interested in science and things like that. We had one discussion from Barbara. And if I get something wrong, Barbara, just chime in here. But you stressed the need for scientists to understand that they need to be speaking to representatives in such a way that you understand what the representative needs, so that what they need to do is solve problems, and that scientists need more training and experience to understand that things like the economy is a benefit and things that the politicians or the representatives will value. Mike, this is a message that's come from a lot of stuff that you've shared over and over. So the need for scientists to have that kind of explicit training about how to recognize their work, not so much in terms of scientific achievements, but very much in terms of what does it do for the problems that the politician is trying to address. That was one thing. And then some folks were talking about their willingness to try to engage with people that are coming from a very, very different perspective, a more negative perspective about science. And we talked about some of the strategies and places where that could happen. And some are, for things like science cafes that happen in different cities and places where you're going to meet the general public. In some places that's easy because, again, you live in an area where people are more predisposed to like science versus those that are in an area where they don't. And so I pointed everyone to our resource document that has some really great links to science communication research and strategies for doing that. And then we had one conversation around building bridges between different groups, scientists and artists or journalists, to find the ways to cross over these different arenas and to take that long game of building the trust in science. So I'm going to stop there, but invite anyone from my rooms to say something if they have a burning thing.
Okay, hearing nothing. Let's go on to Russ, your room.
Okay, I like Patty, I was a member of the general public and I learned a lot. Thank you, everybody who participated. We tried some pitches and we in some cases, and we talked a little bit about what works. And I think the main thing I would say is simplicity. I didn't have anybody go technical on me, so when talking with the general public, I think everyone has a clear sense that you keep the message simple, that you look for a point of connection with local concerns or individual concerns. There was a lot of emphasis on students and training and the importance of training, and basically saying to people, do you know that when all this money for science gets taken away, that the students who are going to be the innovators of the future are just not going to get trained, and that's something that many people might not know, and that scientists are working in the same communities with people. So these are students often from the local area or from who live among the community. So a lot about people's individual concerns. For example, if they have a serious illness and there's a medication that they may not know, that the structures through which medications are developed and approved and safety is assessed or being taken apart right now, and they would be, people would be shocked to know what's happening with veterans' health care, that some important medical data may be destroyed, that sort of thing. But I think, some of us talked about how an important thing is to know the concerns of the individual who you're speaking with, rather than start throwing out these sort of, do you know, did you know this is happening, sort of, because it may be very, very different from what people are hearing in their environment, and their concerns, their starting point may be quite different. But I think this connection with students is a very important one for speaking locally, and everybody seems to have gotten that. Also, we talked with Anna a little bit about how astronomy has this edge, because you can always talk to people. If you mention astronomy, their curiosity will come forward, and you can find a point of connection pretty quickly. I do envy astronomers that.
That's
Okay.
very helpful. Thank you very much. Yeah, some common themes here. Next, we'll go to Rachel.
Yes, thanks. So my charge was really to be talking to scientists, talking to other scientists, but what I really wanted to hear were some examples of what resonated when you're talking to, scientists are members of the public and members of the community, and they have connections in their neighborhood, and they talk to people constantly. And so what are the tactics that people have used to connect with people in their community and explaining what is the impact of the changes that they've been seeing? So Meg had talked about a community that's largely in denial about what's happening, and especially on climate change. But there were a few good stories. But one thing that she's used that's been useful is using LinkedIn, because the connections she has on LinkedIn will be with her professional community, but also friends and neighbors. So that's a way for there to be a stream of comments that people are exposed to, and they see where the scientific implications come into that. Another one was talking about the science deniers are people who have cancer, and sharing information across that community can be very effective. The Science Cafe concept also came up, and so we're seeing that everywhere. It can be incredibly impactful, and it's a way to speak out to community members and to engage them. Nicola talked about a CDC program on obesity where the county extension service is part of that. And it's a very effective program, but it needs to have that discussion so that the impact of cuts, which are happening and will affect the community, that they're made that the electorates are made aware of what those cuts will be doing. Another one from Steve was about drought mitigation, a program that was shut down, and people don't understand what impact that's going to have on the community. And unfortunately, there is going to be a huge impact. And Bev talked about a big scientific meeting, the American Physical Society, where there were, because of changes in the program resulting from government representatives and others who could not attend, means that there was a community of people that might not have met together otherwise under other circumstances. And you see students and more senior scientists looking for jobs and using meetings like that as a forum for trying to reach out and getting opportunities to share their stories. So I think all of these were very useful techniques that people are developing, building, for each other. And I think something like a program where you can share the agendas for science cafes. How did it work? What did you do? Who attended? Those kinds of things, I think would be very helpful.
That's great. Thank you. I really like the specific examples you had, and hopefully folks here can be inspired and go to some of those things in their local area. And we'll finish up with Mike if you want to close us out too.
Yeah, just really quickly. I mean, in the 3 conversations that I was in, one of the things that came up, Elsa had a very good pointer to Portal to the Public, which is sort of a workshopping process for helping folks do a better job of communicating outside their subfield and field, and that's at the Pacific Science Center. So I just looked up the link and dropped that in, and so at least as a place to start looking. And then I think the other one we had an example from Alexis on like the Sea Change program, and how that's sort of helping to like change cultures within physics departments. And I think there a good point is really emphasizing the meeting the human capital demand in industry and government wherever. And so instead of like talking about like the supply side, like we're pushing things out, really sort of talk in terms of meeting these societal demands. It can be a one potential way to sort of like refocus attention and explain the value of in that sense. So with that, I will.
Perfect. Well, just wanted to thank everyone for joining us, and our facilitators and everyone who helped plan, including AAAS staff. We've been working hard for the past few weeks to organize these sessions, and hopefully you got something useful out of this. I'm happy to drop my email as well if you'd like to follow up, and we have a form as well.
Okay. Great. Thank you all.